minute, so I'm gonna do my best, but I'm running off of coffee and cold medicine right now. So also I want to try and make this as discussion based and conversational as possible. So I would love your input. I'd love your insights because I know a lot of you know a lot, and some of you know a lot more than you think you do. So I would love to hear your perspectives. And we're going to have our opportunities to interact throughout this. So I'm looking forward to that. A little fun fact about me, a couple fun facts actually. In my spare time, when I'm not working one-on-one with faculty and leading workshops on evidence-based teaching practices and educational technology, I spend my spare time hiking. I'm an avid hiker. I go up and every time I hike, especially this past year, I did a lot of plants on iNaturalist. If you have that app, that's one I rely on and identify like edible plants and stuff. That's been a huge part of my life. And I also really like birds, especially chickens. So all right, so without further ado, I'm just gonna jump into the presentation here. And like I said, this is gonna be fairly discussion based and conversational, so feel free to jump in. All right, so start my PowerPoint here.
You should have permission now. I just changed it.
Awesome, thank you. Okay. All right, so the name of this presentation is Learning Through Diversity, a Pathway to Advancing Equitable Educational Experiences. And you already know about me, so we'll go ahead and move on. This is something Brian put in here. This is the series progression. So it looks like we're in session 3. Is that correct, Michael? And then there's going to be another session specifically on universal design for learning. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today, but there's going to be a more in-depth one. But UDL or Universal Design for Learning is a great, I guess, umbrella approach to all of the practices I'm going to talk about today on inclusivity and accessibility. And then, of course, you've got the other sessions here, and you can find that on the website and the progression of that. So, all right. So, let's look at a little refresher here. I don't know exactly what he showed you, but here's some information on diversity and inclusion. You can see diversity, there's all these separate pieces, and then them coming together equals inclusion. And here's some like recap of some of the things that I'm assuming he talked with you last time about. So, diverse backgrounds enrich learning. Teaching leverages learning through diversity. Barriers uh, to equal success exist. Equity requires intentional faculty efforts, and this series supports inclusive teaching. And so we're going to dive a little into this is about the application of strategies. And so I'm going to give you some more practical sort of approaches to inclusion and diversity and accessibility in your classes. And this can go for any modality, whether it's in person, asynchronous, synchronous, online, all of that. So, okay, moving on. Okay, so now I want to quickly do a little icebreaker where I get to know you. So go ahead in the chat. I want you to type your name and your discipline and one reason you believe inclusive teaching is valuable. So go ahead and take a moment to do that right now. And if you feel comfortable, I would love to see your face. So if you want to turn on your camera, that would be great. I would love to see you. If you're not comfortable, you can keep your camera off, but it would be awesome to be able to see you too. So we'll take a minute or so and name discipline and one reason you believe inclusive teaching is valuable. While we're sitting here waiting for you to do that, Michael, you teach, right?
I do.
Or you
Yep.
have taught?
Yep.
Can you tell me what discipline you taught in and what you believe, why you believe inclusive teaching is valuable?
So I was a faculty lecturer for the English department here before I was in my current role.
Hmm.
And I think that inclusive teaching, I mean, I don't have a formal like UDL background by any means, but I think that's something that became very clear quickly when I was teaching, at least in English. I still teach grant writing and fellowship support, but something became really clear to me is that people are just, they start at different places. Right.
Hmm.
And so it was interesting to try to learn to design my curriculum in a way that catered to people who may have had very robust writing programs in their high school and people who maybe had never had access to an AP English class, right? And so I think that that was one of my design or one of my methods I know was that I never marked someone down the first time they made a mistake, right? So like when they initially handed in the paper, and if there were certain kind of common, errors I would see, right, in their grammar or the way they were structuring a paper, I never would mark them down. Now I would make lots of notations about what they needed to correct, right? And then I would generally grade on us, in the middle, right, based on how much progress they were making towards actually addressing the feedback, and then usually would give us a somewhat more obviously because I wanted to make sure people met the actual learning deliverables, right? Towards the end, I would kind of gradually change the way that I graded. And so that was something I don't know if that fits into a UDL design or maybe you can tell me if I was doing that wrong, but that was kind of how I approached that. Especially like in like those comp courses like English 101, 102. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no, it sounds like you're saying you had students that had different levels coming in all at the same time. And instead of punishing the students that weren't quite there yet, you gave them an opportunity to catch up by saying, okay, we're not going to grade this initially, we're going to give you a chance to catch up. I think yeah, I think that fits perfectly. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the strategies that go into that. But yeah, I think that's a good example. Thanks, Michael. All right, so did anyone want to talk about what you put in the chat? I have Dana, Laura, Elise, Deanna, David again, the other David, Jake. Um, is it Elmoise? And then Leah,
Yes.
Aaron, Doris, Alex. Anyone want to volunteer to talk about what they put?
Yeah, this Elmo is. Yeah, go ahead. Think inclusive teaching for me, like from a different background, like a different country, different language. It just gives you another way to learn something. Sometimes you don't learn something from like one time, just see someone else, way of teaching. It might help you understand it better. From my experience, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing your perspective. Yeah. Uh, as you were saying, you as an ESL or right as a ESL student or as a student a second language learner, you might have different needs than someone else who's been learning English their whole lives, right? And so having that opportunity to um, show what you know, even if you don't know the language perfectly, right? So um, and also, Michael, so for the chat, will you be able to download people's answer? Like, will you be able to download the chat afterwards and share it with people?
Yeah. Is that something that yeah, I could do that. Yeah.
Yeah, you can definitely do that. I think as the host, you should be able to, there's like an option at the bottom of the chat, and you
Hmm.
should be able to like say to save it or
Oh
download
yeah.
it for later at the
Yep.
end.
I think I see it.
Awesome, because then you can share this with everybody and everybody can read everybody else's. Um, but yeah, I'm gonna just read a couple, unless anyone else wanted to volunteer to read or to talk. Uh,
Um,
all right.
hello,
Yeah.
Alex.
Hi.
So I think inclusive teaching is valuable simply because everybody's different. And as going to get an MFA at 40 in my early 40s that I feel like I have a completely different perspective than when I was at, normal undergraduate age. But I'm also learning things about myself in terms of hearing deficiencies that may have affected my early learning years, with an audio processing disorder, and taking those elements of my own experience and being a teacher, I feel like it's important to understand that there are, as I have had, there are things that you may not even be aware of that are going to affect how you take in information. And so I think inclusive teaching is valuable because everyone learns differently, and we have to consider different ways to be able to convey our information so that hopefully there is a way that the student can latch on to the information that we're trying to give to them.
Yeah, very well said. Thank you, Alex. All right, I'm gonna move on because I don't have a ton of time, but I feel like um we had some good examples and there's definitely more in the chat. So and you will have these later, as I said. So let's go ahead and continue. So here's some of the applied strategies we're going to cover today, and I'm going to list them off here. The first is Universal Design for Learning, or UDL. The second is accessible course materials. Third is culturally responsive teaching. Fourth is building a classroom culture of belonging. Whoops. Fifth is flexible assignments and assessments. Six is clear communication and instructions. Seven is promoting active learning. And eight is regular feedback and opportunities for reflection. We'll have the opportunity to go through these and also discuss some of these and how to apply them. So, all right, starting with UDL. If you're not familiar with UDL, Universal Design for Learning, and so don't worry, again, if you can't read everything right now, these slides are also going to be shared with you. So you can go back and read these, and these are available online too. Um, but Universal Design for Learning covers three columns here, and it's multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means for action and expression. And so when we talk about multiple means of engagement, we're saying, and I think that everyone should know, overall, UDL, Universal Design for Learning, is about student choice. Um, and student choice and student autonomy and representation. So when I talk about student choice and we talk about multiple means of engagement, we're saying offer students the opportunity to choose how they want to learn. And so that could mean, providing different types of ways to access the information that you give them online, whether it be like, or if it's online or in class, whether it be by video or on paper. They've actually debunked learning um, learning styles, but there are learning preferences, and some people learn things better a certain way than others, and some people will learn something the first time one way, and then it has to be reinforced a different way, right? And so we're all just kind of like this complex combination of learning preferences. And so multiple means of engagement addresses that. Multiple means of action and expression would be giving students, for example, instead of saying, okay, we have this one assessment that you do at the end of class, and that's going to determine, the fate of, your final assessment. That's going to determine what you know at the end of this class. Well, maybe instead of doing this high stakes assessment, you say you can choose to do a portfolio, or you can choose to do a paper, or you can choose to record a video. So it's giving them the option to choose how they want to express what they know. So that's what that means. And then, of course, multiple means of representation would be showing, for example, you know, pictures of themselves within the class, and not just pictures, that's just one example, but stories from their cultures, integrating these things into the course, right? And we're going to talk about more about that when we talk about culturally responsive teaching. That's a big part of that. And so everything you're going to see kind of falls under one of these categories, and there's a lot of overlap between these applications, okay? So let's go ahead and move on to the next part. Any questions before we move on from this slide? And you're going to learn more about UDL, I believe, in the next presentation, which I'm not leading. I don't know who's leading that one, but yeah, so they'll take a deep dive into it. It's good stuff.
Actually, that one I think it's going to be led by Rula in the
Oh,
architecture department, and she's really interesting because she's an architect by trade. So she talks about accessible architecture, and then I think she extrapolates that to pedagogy techniques. It's quite brilliant when she does it. So that's a good session for you.
nice.
Yep, yep.
That's great. I love Rula, so I'm excited to hear that. She's great. All right, so now I'm going to show you some examples of accessible course materials, and I'm going to show you in Canvas. Um, and so I'm going to switch over my screen here. Okay. So I'm going to show you an example of a Canvas course that I have that is just, it's my sandbox, basically. So it's just a pretend class, and it has people from my center as students in it. So there's no violation of FERPA going on. But anyway, so here's an example of like when you come into this course, this is a hypothetical course. I call it Technology for Education. The landing page is a homepage that I built specifically to talk about the course here, and it's got all these elements that that really help to add to accessibility, for example. And I'll show you what I mean by that. There's actually a lot of it built into Canvas already. This I built myself. This is an accessibility statement. I built it using HTML. And when I click on it, this opens up and it talks about this course being designed to be as accessible as possible for all students. If you need additional support, contact me at this email address. And then it talks about Ally. Ally is our accessibility scorer within Canvas, and you can check. And in fact, this is actually an image of the symbol, and you can see that it rates it. It green means the score is perfect. It's got perfect accessibility because I have alternate text to describe this image and what it is. But if I didn't have alternate text there, it would probably be red, and it would tell me you need to fix this image. You need to add alternate text. Same with this image here of the immersive reader button. The immersive reader is another accessibility feature we have in Canvas. It's at the top here, immersive reader, and it gives you all these different options for kind of differentiating between types of potential learning differences and catering to those things. So you can translate, you can do things like change the color if that helps you. You can change the font. Comic Sans is actually a really accessible font for certain people. There are grammar options. If English is not your first language, you can highlight nouns or adjectives, verbs, adverbs, all that kind of stuff. So I won't linger too much on that, but that's an example. And letting your students know that that is available to them is so important, right? Um, and then of course there I included a video on all the different features of Ally that they can use alternative formats. So for example, if you go to an assignment, I'm just going to choose an assignment here and find the Ally feature. So let's see. Let me see if it's in here. Okay, so you see this little ally button right next to getting to know you. This is a quiz that I created. It's actually a needs assessment. If you click on the alternative formats ally, it will give you all these different ways that all these things you can download for your specific need. So there's an ebook, electronic braille, an MP3 version for listening. Beeline Reader separates the lines and color codes them. And then there's translated, immersive reader, similar to the one we saw before. So these are all these different alternatives for students and what they can use. And again, I think it's really important to be able to tell students that those are available to them and that they have those options to use in the course, right? So letting them know that they have those accessibility features. Let's see. So going back here. So I talked about alternate text. These are kind of the big ones. Um, having, for example, when you have text, you want there to be good color contrast so it's readable. You want to make sure that you don't have images of text because you want there like a electronic reader to be able to read it, right? A page reader for those who are sight impaired. We also have now web access content accessibility guidelines or WCAG. These are going to be required. These are the 2.0 AA. All of these accessibility guidelines are going to be required by federal law. I believe that's coming up in 2026 is kind of the deadline for that. I believe spring of 2026. I just saw, let's see, someone in the chat. What's the name of the accessibility icon? And is this something that's already, yes. So it is Ally and it's built into Canvas. We paid for it. So it's in there now. It's like integrated into Canvas. So you can use that. It's available for all of you in your Canvas courses. So
Can I can,
all
can
right,
I
so
ask
those are
can I
what's
ask
that?
something? Can I ask a question of you as an
Yeah,
instructional designer? Okay, so say somebody, so maybe they all are in Canvas if they are taking courses, but maybe some folks aren't
yeah,
TAs, right? And don't have their own Canvas shells. If somebody was interested in getting experience using an LMS like this, could they work with CIRTL to get like a course shell set up so they could like make something like this? Is that
100%.
okay?
Absolutely. Yeah, in fact, that's one of the main things that we do. We offer a template, which is helpful, but it doesn't tell you all of the things that you need for designing a course. It gives you kind of a nice visual layout, but we do offer a template. We also offer something called the CQ plus rubric, which is course quality, and it has three columns. Each column is a different modality. The first column being face-to-face courses, how to build your Canvas course if you're just teaching face-to-face, and the minimum requirements to meet accessibility and good and best teaching practices for face-to-face, the middle column being then for synchronous and or hybrid courses, and then the last column being for asynchronous courses. And each column is additive. So the less contact that you have in person with your students, the more built out your course needs to be. So if you have an asynchronous class, you got to build it out really well because that's how your students, that's what they're interacting with most is that Canvas interface. And so we can work with you one-on-one. We can provide these resources for you, can help you build your course from the ground up. Or if you inherit a Canvas course from a previous instructor, we can help you redesign. If you look at it and you're like, wow, I don't understand what's going on in this course, we can help you to organize it and kind of like figure out where to go from there. So yeah, that's a huge part of what we do in CETL as instructional designers. So yeah, any questions about accessibility here before we move on? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and switch back to my slides. Okay. Okay, so I gotta move all these windows around because your faces are now blocking parts of my functions here. Okay, here we go. All right, so the next thing is we're gonna quickly do like a little discussion and we're gonna talk about visible and invisible barriers. Raise your hand if you've seen the iceberg before, the cultural iceberg. I think it's pretty common, right? And you can use the little raise hand symbol too if your camera is off. Um, all right, so let's go ahead and talk about nice. Let's talk about these. So what's above and below the surface here? And I'll go over some of the questions and you can answer whichever ones you want. But please feel free to speak out, or if you're not comfortable, you can also put your answers in the chat. But when we see the tip of the iceberg, what do we see? When we look beneath the surface, what do we see? And what can we do to respect, represent, and accommodate difference, and how? So if you want to take a moment to digest that, and then we can talk about it, we can share in the chat. And you can see all the different pieces of culture and the pieces of someone, not just culture, but in a person's background and history and what makes them diverse is all part of that iceberg depicted here. Okay, so it looks like we got something in the chat. What you see versus what you do not know about the person. Yeah, exactly. Right. And you can see sometimes you can see their age, you can often see their race, not you can't always see their gender, but you can often see their skin color, and people make assumptions about them based on that, right? But there's a lot lying below the surface that we can't see. Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you, Aaron. What else? What can we do to respect, represent, and accommodate difference? We only see the obvious and not anything meaningful about the person. Yeah. Being careful not to state things as if everybody sees it that way. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more, Elise?
Sure. Um, I've just observed sometimes when people are used to being around other people who are very similar to them, and then maybe they're in a group where there's more diversity, they can sometimes not be careful enough to state things in a way that is inclusive instead of just everybody who shares their same framework or their same worldview or their where they're coming from at it. We can't assume that people see things or understand things or think about things the same way that we do.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. Okay. All right, David says we can best get to the below surface characteristics by listening and encouraging participation. Yeah, that's how we're getting into the how, right? So how would you then, let's do a follow-up question. How would you do that? How would you encourage listening and encouraging participation? And anyone can answer this if they want. David, if you want to follow up on that, you can, or anyone else want to jump in? How can we do that? Mhm. Asking good questions. Like what type of questions? What kind of questions would you ask? Can I have an example?
I'd kind of like to jump in here because it's easier than typing.
What's that?
I'd kind of like to jump in here because it's easier than typing.
Sure. Can you turn up your volume a little bit, David,
Sure,
please?
let me do that.
Awesome. Thank you.
How's that? Is that any better?
I'm still having trouble hearing you. Is everybody else also having trouble? Yeah.
I can hear. I just have to listen close, I think.
Oh,
Okay.
that's fair. Maybe I need to turn up my volume too.
Yeah, I turned it up and I can hear. I can hear you, I think.
Okay, go ahead, David.
Okay, in my experience, the main problem with a lot of teaching is there tends to be lecturing instead of presenting points and then asking for input or different views or personal experience, things that will start to drag out all those below the surface characteristics.
That is a fantastic point. So what I'm hearing is a lot of teaching is very one-sided, right? And it's not very interactive. It's that sage on the stage. I'm going to teach to you and I don't want to learn anything about you. Yeah, that's such a great point. Thank you, David. Anyone want to add to that? Okay, everybody's so quiet tonight. All right. We're gonna go ahead and move on from this. I'm sure a lot of you have seen the iceberg. It's pretty common, but we do have a lot to cover, so I'm going to move on and we'll have more opportunity to discuss things too. So let's move on to the next point in our applicable strategies. So culturally responsive teaching. liberate students to find and use their own voices, engage in thinking, examine issues through multicultural perspectives, and become active participants. Who would like to define what culturally responsive teaching is? If you've had experience with it before, can you tell us what culturally responsive teaching is? Nobody from EHHS? I feel like some of you would know,
I could
or at
spit,
least like heard of it.
I
What's
could
that?
spitball, I could spitball something. I kind of have, I'm actually curious about this. So like, I think of
Yeah.
like a lot of how we've approached, at least here in the US, right? We approach education in a very kind of like Western way, right? You know what I mean? Like there's sort of like a one size fits all approach. Is it, I don't know, is it kind of like subverting a kind of like Western ontology within education? Or you know what I mean? I don't know how else to say that, but like something like that.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a huge part of it. Including student voices and cultures within the class as well. So like getting their stories and including those in the lesson. Yeah, Aaron, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, so a perfect example here is a law professor I had who had a PhD, and he would do like the history of the criminal justice system, right?
Mhm.
And of course, he would talk in general, but then he would go into specifics like how the Black population or the Latinx population or the Asian population, and then he would go around and say, "Have you guys had any issues with this?" And then some of the students who shared that background during that day would raise their hands and start that conversation, and that's how he would get it interwoven in the conversation. So he's really strategic on how to do that. And the main thing is touching someone who has felt that discrimination come out and talk about it.
Yeah. That's a great example. Yeah, giving them the opportunity to connect and make that relevant by saying, you know, this is how this affects this type of person. Let's also hear, their stories, right? And bring your stories forward if this affected you. Yeah. So then the students become part of the narrative. They're not, nobody's being excluded because as Michael said, there's kind of this sort of dominant cultural narrative that often takes place in higher ed, and we want to try and subvert that, right? As Michael was pointing out, that's a excellent points from both of you. And so by including those stories, you do that, and you say not everyone's reality is like that. It's there's a lot of diverse perspectives, right? And bringing those in. So, did anyone else want to contribute to the culturally responsive teaching and your experience with that, or have an example of how you've seen it play out in classes you've taken, seen how someone has done that well?
While folks are thinking, I'm just going to say the CIRTL project that we're doing this year, Aaron, that it reminds me, what you just, the example you just gave reminds me so much of what the student is doing this year. She's using case studies from different cultures to teach public health. And it was so powerful the way she did it. She'd start and she'd have case studies from like the US, and then she would show that there were overlaps in case studies in other countries where you wouldn't think there would be so much overlap between the US, right? But there is. And then what was really powerful was that she's from Guatemala and she ended it with a case study from her own experience working as a public health professional in Guatemala, right? But it's like inserting that there's like almost like a kind of humanity in that, right? That makes it not just more relatable, but like kind of more, it's more teachable by doing that too, right? People kind of, they care more when you frame it in that kind of way. And it just reminded me of that. And it's just another pitch for the CIRTL project because you can totally do stuff like that. As you move through the series, I mean, that really is the kind of stuff we want people to be thinking about and doing in their classes, even as a TA. So.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. That's a great example. Thanks, Michael. I did if is there anyone else who wanted to share on this real quick? Any other examples? All right, because I do have an example too. I before I was an instructional designer, way back in 2014, I worked at the U of I as an ESL teacher at the American American Language and Culture program with the ALCP, which was an intensive English program. And one of the classes I taught was an American diversity and culture class. And so I had students from all over the world, learning English who came to this class to also learn about American culture. But it wasn't just one note. I brought in public speakers from different departments from uh, the Women's Center, and I brought in, I believe it's been 10 years. So um, I brought in a someone to talk about Native American issues. I also I brought someone in to talk about African American culture and their issues in American society. And then I also, well, and there was other speakers as well. So we had different perspectives, and those guest speakers were the ones who were in the best places to be able to talk about those things, not me, because wasn't that, right? And so, and then at the end of class, one of their projects was they had to we did like a poster presentation session where each one of them brought in a piece of their culture to talk about, and then we all like went around and looked at all their posters, and they some of them brought like real things, so like realia, and they talked about their culture, and they were an aspect of it and shared it with the class. Some of them brought food. It was really cool. It was so much fun. Yeah, Alex. I saw Alex's hand first, sorry.
I was going to say, we have an introduction to technical theater course where we have a lot of people, then, can come from any area of study, not necessarily from theater, to partake in learning about how to build and process the technical track for a theatrical production. But we try, in terms of becoming an active participant and engaging in thinking, scenery, if you can afford to build it again and you throw it away. And so for final projects, we have tried to integrate the students' own interests in terms of saying we have material that can be made accessible to you. And if there is something that is of interest to them, then they're able to fabricate that within reason for a final project. So I mean, we've had people make everything from a shadow box to a surfboard to, sky's the limit, right? But it's all about their interests, right? Chessboards, you name it. So it's just the simple idea of seeing a project and then, okay, well, what do we need to do to incorporate the elements to bring it all together?
Yeah,
But
kind of
and
bringing
we
in
just
their personal experiences.
well, we want them to also their interests because we don't want it to be. That's the one stipulation is that you're not allowed to walk out of the final class and deposit it in the dumpster on the way by.
Oh, okay, that's good. Oh, yeah, thanks for sharing, Alex. Aaron, did you want to also share something? I saw your hand too.
Yeah, what you were saying, Jen.
Hmm.
Just to go back to that class, I just put it in the chat. So the professor there um, was showing, how the racism is built within the system of his institution, specifically, it's just keeping more alive in a predominantly white institution. And throughout the semester, she would have experts that she has co-authored with or done publications or books with, and they're like all over the world. And but it was more centered on Native Americans, and from that extension, people from the South, Mexico, Central America, so on. So she would have experts coming in, and these experts were one of them was, I believe, Mexican, but he brought his son with him, and his son is a PhD student at a university in Europe. And so then they started going at it, saying how Europe is more better educated with higher education than America because America's lagging. And so she's like, it's going to take time for all this. So it was great because that just opened the community up, and we were just like, what's better? Is it here? Is it there? It was just a great class, and it just took me back to what you were saying.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Yeah.
Can I throw in a quick comment? I wasn't sure how to
Sure.
use my hand symbolically on the thing.
No worries.
I think sometimes we don't stop to think about the fact that even people who share the same country of origin, the same ethnic group as us, can still be from a different culture. I've noticed a difference in culture being away from academia for tw the last 20 years and coming back. The culture inside academia is different than it is outside of it.
Mm.
And just being aware of not to get into that ivory tower mode and try to make connections to people on the streets who are not part of academia. It really is a different culture.
Yeah, you bring up a great point. There's a huge cultural difference between like um, the baby boomer ages to millennials to Gen X's to Gen Z. Like the way that they learn, there's a lot of similarity, but like if you're comparing someone like Gen X between Gen Z, there's a lot of cultural differences between them, right? And so they're gonna have different things that speak to them. So yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the next thing. Great discussions. So, like I said, don't feel shy if you want to jump in. You have something to say. Your perspective matters, 100%. So, all right. So the next part is mindset and belonging. And so we're aiming towards creating a classroom culture that fosters belonging. It's critical to academic success, and there are many reasons why students feel like they don't belong. And can anyone name a few reasons why a student might feel like they don't belong? You can put that in the chat while I continue. So yeah, give us some examples. Why do you think students might feel like they don't belong? Sometimes students feel like they don't belong because they feel like they can't do it. That's one reason. And often this is a matter of what's called mindset. And so the next slide, we're going to talk about the difference between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. So, yeah, so if you want to put in the chat some reasons why you think students might feel like they don't belong, go ahead and do that now. And then I'm going to move on to talk about mindset. Okay, looks like some put something in there. Like imposter syndrome. Is that what you mean? Uh, yeah, that's a good example. They do not see someone who they recognize to be from their own culture. Yeah, they're not representative. Yeah, or they're not represented. Yeah. Yeah, okay, cool. Thanks, Dana. Yeah. Imposter syndrome, they don't see themselves represented, so they don't know that they can be successful because they don't see someone else in their position being successful, right? Um, Reading and discussing plays that don't share the culture or perspective of students represented in the roster. Yep, exactly. Yep. So they're not represented. Yeah. Different religion or politics. Yeah, ageism. Oh, that's definitely a part of that. There can be ageism experienced. I know I've experienced it at times too. So, perfectionism. Yep, being really hard on yourself and expecting yourself to always get the right answer, even when you're learning and you don't have the right answer. Yeah. Okay. So let's move on to growth mindset versus fixed mindset. Okay, so we're shifting from a fixed mindset to growth mindset. And here's the difference here. So a growth mindset sees failure as an opportunity to grow. They can learn to do anything they want. Challenges are helpful for growth. Effort and attitude determine abilities. Feedback is constructive. I want to try new things. I'm inspired by the success of others. Um, Someone with a fixed mindset, they see failure as the limit of their abilities. They see their failure as being like, well, I wasn't able to do it perfectly the first time, so that means I'm never going to learn. If I'm not naturally good at it, then I must not have the talent. And so therefore I shouldn't try, right? And if you've ever, I don't know if anyone's read Mindset, where the book Mindset, where this comes from by Carol Dweck. In it, she gives examples of people who succeeded in life, like really succeeded, and how it wasn't based on talent, it was based on effort, right? So like looking at someone, they mentioned I believe it was the twins who learned how to play chess and became like the like incredible chess players, but they learned it through hard work and through practicing consistently, not because they were necessarily any smarter or more talented than the next person, but because they did it every day until they became experts, right? And so that's the idea, the difference between a growth and fixed mindsets. Not like, oh, well, I tried once, I can't do it, I'm no good. That's fixed mindset. And we want to move out of that. Right. Someone posted in the chat. 10,000 hours. Yeah, 10,000 hours. It's the amount of work you put in, right? Not you just are born with it. And yes, there are occasional people you meet where you're like, wow, that person didn't even have to try, but that's not common for everyone, right? And so a lot of us have to put the work in, and we're not taught that. We're not taught that it comes from effort. We're taught that, oh, you're just gifted, you were struck by lightning, and that's just not true. Um, so I'm going to try to move through that. And so let's discuss this now. So our next exercise, think about something you can do to help students. One, accept the productive struggle of learning. Two, resist the urge to say, I can't. Three, embrace the power of yet. I can't do it yet, right? And then four, learn from constructive criticism. So give you a second to kind of process these things and think about ways that you can help your students with these. And feel free to speak out when you have an idea.
I think it's as simple as pointing out to students that they need to embrace the power of yet. We recently hired a graduate to do some properties direction for the department for the season as a seasonal employee. And we just wrapped up our first show, Angels in America, in which Ford literally, once we were done striking the show and bringing everything back to be able to filter off into the world around us from where we borrowed and everything. Ford said to me at the end, couldn't have done it without you. And as a recent grad, I thought about it afterwards, but the next time or when it comes around again, the opportunity, say, I couldn't have done it without you, I'll be like, you can't do it without me yet, but you will
Mhm.
do it
Mhm.
without me. Right. And
Yeah.
it's the mental preparation of saying, yes, you're here and you're a step above where you were last year when you were a student of mine. But now you're not a student of mine. You're not in the classroom. You're an
Mhm.
employee. We're colleagues. So I'm helping you, but you will do what you're doing without me at some point in time in the future.
Yeah. That's a great reminder, telling students like you're going to have your training wheels off at some point and you can do it. You just maybe not there yet, but eventually you will be. So, yeah. Anyone else have experience with this, or have you been in a class where your professor, or even like you can even go back to K through 12, where your teacher was like, "Look, you know, this is not a very growth mindset of you," and they led you in that direction.
Maybe not that, but I think the fixed mindset is something I'm currently struggling with in the class I'm teaching, um, which is there's a very analytical aspect. So there's a lot of math, there's a lot of new skills that these students are being asked to learn. And so they get stuck and they see a scary math problem and they freeze and they don't move past kind of that initial fear, I think, of these new concepts. And so I always just try to make the material as accessible as possible, but it's definitely something I struggle with. A lot of students like do really well, and then there's a few that just um, they get stuck in that I didn't make sense at first, and so I've given up on it. So yeah, this is
Yeah.
something I would love more strategies for, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I would say, does anyone, before I jump in and give her some advice, does anyone want to try?
Yeah,
I know you,
I'd like to jump in on that. This is,
sure, go for it.
I didn't get into grad school until after I was 60. And in nuclear engineering, there's a lot of math, partial differential equations, and I
Yeah.
just got overwhelmed so quickly, not having touched any of that for decades. And the guy that was teaching the class was incredibly good about directing me to other sources that I had never thought about, like YouTube videos and different programs at other universities and places of hearing the same information but differently. And little by little, those would catch. And sure enough, then you can figure it out.
Okay.
I understand exactly what you're talking about. That's totally understandable to me.
Thank you.
Do you try to tell them, build that kind of like classroom culture of, hey, this is a safe place to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. It's inevitable. And I want you to keep trying, even though I know you're going to make mistakes. Like everybody does. That's the way, that's how this works. Like just building that kind of like classroom atmosphere.
Yeah, I can always keep working on that.
We do that in our, I mean, just I'm thinking about in my department, that's a conversation we have is that you should have a culture of error. I don't know how we've said it before, but that's like something where it's like you should encourage mistakes almost, right? Like it's actually part of the learning process. And we have whole meetings around things that went wrong. And it's like not bad, right?
Oh,
And I don't know. I no, it's usually, I mean, it's not like it never is. It's like a mistake is the most information rich thing, right? It's actually probably more information rich than success is. Because success is often like the culmination of many mistakes, right? And so like, and they eventually turn into things that went right. And so I don't know, that's been my experience. Just, I mean, in higher ed, in teaching, but also now working in administration is like, and the same is to be said of like, with like, I teach grant writing now, and we had someone come in from the NIH who or from the National Institute of Health and Human Sciences, who was saying that she's getting ready to submit her sixth attempt on an NIH grant. And then she's like, yep, I just fill up a big glass of wine and I sit down with the reviewer comments and I'm just like geared up, to submit again because it's like they've built the whole culture of submission around getting denied because it happens and there's no avoiding it. I was just working with an NIH F series fellowship applicant today where I'm like, you might not get it this time, but you can definitely internalize the reviewer comments and move forward, right? That's like a strategy that like we build into like the entire framework of grant writing and fellowship writing and really everything we do in our department. So
Yeah,
thank
yeah,
you.
good point. Yeah, Alex, let's make it real quick and then we gotta move on.
Oh,
Go for it.
I was just gonna say that I recently had a student who set up a roadblock for themselves because they didn't know anything about rigging, right? And very few undergraduate students should know about how to rig something that's overhead for safety. But
Mm.
they were rigging a flat, and I was like, build the flat. Don't worry about the rigging. The rigging is in the future. Worry about the now. We can't rig the flat without the flat. I will show you how to rig the flat. Start
Yeah.
with what you know. Build the flat. Then we
Oh
rig.
yeah. That's great. Yeah, that's an excellent example. So like scaffolding, right? So you're starting at step one and building upon that. Yep. Absolutely. All right. So I don't want to run out of time, so I'm going to move on. Thank you for everyone's input. You all are so insightful and I love it. All right. So for flexible assignments and assessments, some things to think about are space and what space you're in and what you can use, place, right? Are they asynchronous and are they at home or are they in the physical classroom? What kind of time do they have? Are they adults who have limited time and their asynchronous class has to be flexible to their schedule, or are they undergrads and they're a little more free? Um, what sort of methods you're going to use and how those align with your learning objectives, but also like how those align with your students' needs as well, and knowing how to include activities that do align with your students' needs, right? And learning to be flexible. If you try something in your class and it doesn't work, revise it, right? Do apply different iterations, try something different, change it up. Sometimes if all your students are failing at something, it's not because they're dumb, right? It's because maybe you just need to adjust it a little bit more and then go back a little bit in your scaffolding and then build up again, right? Then what expectations do you have for them, and are you being clear about about the expectations, right? And so then that leads into active learning, engaging in active learning and feedback and reflection. So we have here this pyramid, and it shows what students tend to learn the most of. And can everybody see this, or do you need me to zoom in a little bit? I can zoom in. So let's look at this pyramid real quick, kind of zoom out a little bit more. Um, and this is by Edgar Dale, and it's showing 10% of what we read is remembered after 2 weeks, down to, or I should say, up to 90% of what we both say and do. So if you can have students making and doing things in your class that are really relevant and authentic, they're going to remember what they learned so much better, right? And that's active learning. That's part of active learning. So we're going to go over here and kind of look at these different activities that you can do for active learning. And there are different like authentic tasks that you can do, but things like jigsaw discussions where each person has a different piece of information that they learn really well, and then they bring it back to their group and they create a whole picture with it. Interactive lectures where instead of just being sage on the stage, you're asking them, doing like the Socratic method and asking them questions and asking them to contribute to the knowledge in the class. Because, like I said before, your students know so much more than they even think that they know themselves, and they actually do know a lot. And so if you can ask them questions to contribute to that building of knowledge, it really makes a difference. Peer review is similar. Think, pair, share, give them a chance to talk it out, see each other's perspectives. I don't know about you, but like when I was in my grad program, I would read a paper one way, and then I'd come to class and someone would say something that about what they read, and it would be so enlightening because I didn't think of it that way. So being able to see it from someone else's perspective was just so illuminating. So that's a great opportunity for that. Discussions are fantastic. Like the more you can discuss and include activities where you build knowledge together, like that's going to be worth its weight in gold for those students remembering, retaining what they've learned, right? So let's go ahead. Oops, I zoomed out way too far. Okay, so the next thing is clear communication and instructions, right? So this goes to transparency in learning and teaching, or TILT. When you're doing an assignment or an activity, or even just like for the entire class as a whole, talk about your purpose. What are they learning? What's the skills that's going to be practiced? What knowledge are they going to be gaining? What at the task level, what will they do? Explain what they're going to do and how to do it, why they're doing it, right? Back to the purpose. And then criteria. What does excellence look like? Provide an example. If you have you want to ask your previous student, right? Say, can I take your name off of this and use this as an example? But you can do that. You can say, I have this amazing example, and here's how you can formulate it. I want you to do your own thing, but here's an example of what excellence looks like, right? Criteria provided in advance so they know what to expect. They know how they're going to be graded, right? So rubrics are really great for that. Communicating this ahead of time is going to make a huge difference towards their success because it's clear that there's a purpose. They know why they're doing it. They know what they're going to do. They know what done looks like, all of that, right? So let's move on to the next thing. So then the rest of these things are some examples of ways that you can design or things that you can design into your course to make it more inclusive, more accessible. And then from here on out, let me make sure what's on. Yeah. Oh, we have an exercise, but I don't think we're gonna have time to get to it. But we will open up for like a more discussion and ask if you want to ask questions, and I can answer your questions. And of course, Michael can help me too. But here's some things that you can put into your class that will help you make it more inclusive. For example, things like considering pronouns, taking time to reflect. Oh, that's the thing I didn't get to, and the giving students time to digest, right, and think about what they've learned. Ask them to reflect on it. After they've done an activity, you can either have them discuss it or write a reflection on it, right? And so, promote confidence. Growth mindset is good for that. Ensure equal access, review cultural references, create robust rubrics, right? And so all of these are great things to design into your course to make it more inclusive. Move on to the next thing. Um, before we do this, before we go into discussion and questions, I just want to show you some of the other things that Brian put into these slides. These you can read on your own time because you're going to have access to these slides, but this is just additional information, links to cool stuff. There's critical self-evaluation tools to assess your implicit bias, which is really useful because we all have biases, right? And then here's some more information about processes involved in DEIA, and then more links to guides for growth and development, and then things on our website for inclusive teaching and learning and that are resources. So now let's go into questions, and we can also do discussions about this too, but really I want to hear your questions and perspectives about everything we talked about today. So let's start with if anyone has any questions or comments on what we talked about. You want me to follow up on anything? Okay. So let's address some of these then. What would exclusionary teaching and learning look like to you? Like if you had to give an example of what not to do, what would that look like in your classes? What would that look like to you? So after everything we talked about, oh, awesome. Someone put something in the chat. Being dismissive of contributions after asking for statements from students, nice. Or not nice, I should say, because it's a bad example. So, but thank you, Alex. Yes, being dismissive of contributions. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, sorry, my sick brain is kicking in. I'm losing steam. Um, um, yeah. So, like, I guess can you give me an example of that? I was gonna think of one, but I my brain has left the building. Alex, would you be willing to give an example of that?
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Oh, no worries.
Well,
Yeah.
are you talking about being dismissive of contributions?
Yeah.
I would say, it's like if I'm asking it, you were referencing it before in terms of like setting expectations and saying this is what I'm looking for. You know,
Mm,
if I'm asking the class for what, instead of having them search what I'm thinking, what I just let them know this is what I'm looking for, right?
mm,
So if I'm they're wanting to, I'm dangling like a carrot, but I'm leading them in the wrong direction, right? They
oh,
they
yeah.
shouldn't be trying to figure out what I want. They should be producing what I want, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And as the expert, to add to that, and having the open discussions and giving them the chance to present their perspectives, you as the expert still have the opportunity to ask questions that guide them in the right direction. But you're their guide, right? And so you're trying to arrive at this answer, but you're ultimately letting them get there themselves. But yeah, you're providing a structure for them.
Yeah, but it shouldn't be a secret what the goal
No,
is, right?
no, not at all. Yeah. Exactly. It shouldn't be a surprise. And and in fact that's often why we do that is why we do outcomes and objectives and saying this is what I expect you to take away at the end. I expect you to be able to learn this, right? And so having those objectives being clear and to say this is what we're aiming towards. I have been in presentations where they've done like the instructor kept doing bait and switches. He'd be like, "What do you think of this?" And then he'd be like, "Well, actually, no, that's not right because of." It's like, what do you want? Like, I think he got some sort of weird ego boost from it. But it made everyone shut down. Everyone was like, "Well, I don't want to say anything because now he's going to call me out for being wrong." So yeah, totally. Always focusing on the same person or group of people as you teach. Okay. Yeah, like the most vocal, right? Maybe giving even the ones who seem like introverted, giving them a way to express themselves, even if they're not comfortable speaking in class. Finding a way for them, for their voices to be heard, like maybe allowing them to reflect on it in a written way, right? Only using one method for presenting information and learning, like only lectures. Yep. So having like different materials, having as in UDL, right? Having the different means of engagement. Oh, the belittling of students. No, definitely not growth mindset for sure. How about grading on a curve? I think there are times where it's not productive. Okay, Dana, do you want to expand on that a little bit? So how
Oh,
in your
got
oh
my mic
sorry,
on. Here we go.
no worries.
Uh, yeah, I think sometimes grading on a curve or I feel like I've taken classes before where it feels like everyone just got like the same grade. Or that the curve was so high that maybe like everybody failed the test, but we all ended up getting passing grades. And I don't think it like accurately reflects the knowledge, maybe.
Or
Um,
maybe if they're all failing, like it sounds like maybe they weren't appropriately scaffolded to that point, right? Like why
yeah.
are they failing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So instead of grading on a curve, maybe the test could have been structured differently or
Yeah.
yeah, the questions I think were just above everybody's head. I'm just thinking of like an example from undergrad, but
Yeah.
uh,
Absolutely. All right, so we've talked about some things that we agree would be exclusionary. Um, so what do you think now that we've done this, we talked about it, what sort of things would you do in your class to be more inclusive? We don't have to get to number three if we're gonna run out of time, but what I would like to hear back from you, what sort of things would you like to try to be more inclusive in your course? Feel free to put it in the chat or you can say it out loud. Okay, communicate a sense that you truly care about each student. Try to make a connection with each of them. Yeah, absolutely. And even in your larger classes, so this is a question I get to in some of the workshops when I talk about authentic learning is someone will be like, well, what if I have a class of 100 students? How do I get to know them? I can't possibly get to know each and every one of them. And that's true. You can't get to know every single one of them. Um, I recommend something like a needs assessment from the beginning, and you can make it quantitative, and you can build it actually in Canvas, where you ask them questions where they select from a series of possible answers, and then that aggregates them, right? It collects them, and so then you can see at the end an analysis of how students answered, and because there is like a statistical analysis at the end of these kind of quizzes for how students answer, and then you can see how they answered, and you can begin to include their perspectives from the answers that they chose into your course. And if for some reason there's answers that maybe didn't cover everyone, I think you can, if I remember correctly, in the quiz development, you can leave like one that says other, and then have them explain further, and so then they can explain further. But that's an option that you can build right into Canvas. And so even with those really large classes, you can still kind of get to know your students on a larger level, right? That's helpful to know. And anything that I talk about here today, I can help you build. Like if you want to learn how to build inclusivity into your course, at least on the Canvas side, and we can do it in person too, but um, I have lots of tips and ideas for that. But anything you need help with, just reach out to me. I'll give you I'll give you my email. We can do Zoom meetings, we can do in-person meetings. It can be anything from as little as 10 minutes to up to an hour and a half at a time. So here's my email from Jen L. Beck at uidaho.edu. There you go. Okay, and so let's look at some other answers. There's try to elicit responses from all students equally. Yep. Always encourage questions by saying that there is no stupid question. Yep. That's part of growth mindset. Yeah. So people feel comfortable asking questions and feeling included and valued. With pronouns, how you communicate to the class. It isn't any longer hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's a hello, everyone. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I've heard some YouTubers say guys, gals, and non-binary pals, which I think is really fun. Um, Trying to maintain and educate oneself on implicit bias as an educator, especially when it comes to any sort of career guidance. Oh, yeah. Okay, trying to maintain it. Yeah, right. I'm trying to think of where do you think implicit bias comes in with that, Jorian? I only know this because of failure. Oh, for the pronouns, yeah. But Jorian, what do you mean? Can you talk about, like, can you give an example of that?
Yeah, for sure. I helped conduct a state required professional development course for middle school teachers. And a big part of it, specifically with implicit bias, is how a lot of times in career guidance, in particular, people have biases about, like, say a woman wants to go to a career technical education course and they haven't showed any interest in anything, but oftentimes they will be pushed maybe more towards like a culinary track versus an engineering track. And
Yeah.
sometimes educators don't even realize that it's happening. But yeah, that's kind of what I meant by that.
Oh yeah, no, that's a great example. I didn't even think of that, but that does happen a lot. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. We are out of time, but I that doesn't mean that I'm done with you. So if, like I said, if you have any other questions you want to follow up, email me. I this is what I do for a living, and I love doing it. I love helping people connect better with their students, and improving their approach to teaching, being more effective in the classroom. Like this is my MO. So yeah, so just reach out. And anything else you want to say, Michael, before we end this session?
No, I think that was great. I know I talked in the beginning about the certs. I just also want to just let people know I take attendance during this, so no need to like email me and let you know that uh that you were here. I know a few people did last time. I just go through the list. I can see all your names. So, but yeah, no. Aside from that, I think this is great. And I think we mentioned earlier we'll have another guest speaker coming in to talk about universal design. for learning in more detail. And she's an architecture professor, and so it's a really interesting angle that she takes with it, and I think that you're all going to enjoy it a lot. But yeah, just keep an eye out for emails from me, and I'll see y'all next month. So
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything.